Welcome to Creepy Mysteries. Before moving to the story, I just want to take a moment. Every story here is crafted to take you on a spine-chilling journey. If you enjoy what you hear and want more tales of the unknown, consider subscribing to the channel. It truly means the world to us. And if this story intrigued you, let us know by liking the video and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us uncover even more mysteries to share with you. Now let's move on to the story. I've always loved living alone. My little house at the edge of town wasn't much to brag about, a one-story place tucked away behind a grove of trees. But it was mine. The solitude, the quiet, the peace, it all felt perfect. No neighbors to bother me, no noise from the busy streets, just the sounds of birds during the day and the occasional rustling of leaves at night. For a long time, I thought I'd found my dream life. But dreams can quickly turn into nightmares. It started with small things. My keys would go missing, only to turn up in the strangest places, inside the fridge, under the couch cushions, once even stuffed into my winter boots. I'd laugh it off, blaming my own scatterbrained tendencies. Then came the noises. At first, it was subtle, faint scratching sounds that I convinced myself were nothing more than rats in the walls or maybe a branch brushing against the siding. But over time, the sounds grew louder, more deliberate. Scraping, like nails on drywall. Footsteps, soft and slow, in the dead of night. I didn't want to admit I was scared. The idea of someone, or something, invading my little sanctuary was too much to bear. I told myself it was just my imagination, amplified by too many late nights and too much caffeine. Then, one stormy night, my world unraveled. The storm hit with an intensity one hadn't seen in years. Sheets of rain hammered against the windows, thunder growled in the distance, and the wind howled like a living thing. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when the power suddenly went out, plunging the house into a suffocating darkness. I wasn't immediately worried. Power outages were common during storms. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and started toward the circuit breaker. But as I moved through the house, a strange heaviness settled over me. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the darkness itself was alive. When I reached the hallway, I froze. My flashlight beam illuminated the wall, and there, just above eye level, were deep, vertical scratches. The marks weren't random, they were deliberate, like they'd been made with purpose. My stomach churned as I reached out to touch them, the grooves rough and unsettling under my fingers. A creak broke the silence. It was faint, but unmistakable, and it came from the guest room down the hall. My heart thundered in my chest as I turned toward the sound, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Slowly, I approached the door, every step heavier than the last. The room was quiet when I entered. The furniture was undisturbed, and the faint smell of lavender from an old air freshener lingered in the air. But something felt wrong. The bedspread was slightly rumpled, as if someone had been sitting there, and the air carried a damp, musty odor that hadn't been there before. As I scanned the room, my light landed on the floor vent near the corner. The screws were loose, and dirt was smeared around the edges, as if it had been pried open. I crouched down, dread pooling in my stomach, and that's when I heard it, faint, raspy breathing coming from the vent. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The breathing stopped abruptly, leaving me in a suffocating silence. The next morning, after a sleepless night on the couch, I decided to search the house more thoroughly. I was desperate for answers, even if part of me didn't want to find them. As I moved through the hallway, something caught my eye, a sliver of light peeking from behind the bookshelf. I hesitated, then pushed it aside, revealing a small, hidden panel. It was slightly ajar, leading into a dark, narrow crawlspace. I didn't want to go in. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to leave the house and never come back. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, got the better of me. Grabbing my flashlight, I took a deep breath and crawled inside. The space was cramped and freezing, the walls scratched with jagged marks that seemed to claw at me as I passed. The smell was overwhelming, damp, rotten, and suffocating. A few feet in, I found a crumpled blanket surrounded by crumbs, wrappers, and empty water bottles. Someone had been living here. My chest tightened as I tried to process the realization. Then I saw the photos. Dozens of them, pinned haphazardly to the wall. They were all of me. Sitting on the couch. Cooking in the kitchen. Sleeping in bed. Each photo was more invasive than the last, chronicling my life in terrifying detail. My hands shook as I reached out to touch one, the edges crinkling under my fingers. A sound broke the silence, a faint, raspy breathing, just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I froze, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. Slowly, I turned the beam toward the sound. For a split second, I saw it, a pale face with sunken eyes and a twisted smile staring back at me from the darkness. Panic took over. I scrambled backward, dropping the flashlight as I clawed my way out of the crawlspace. The sound of shuffling and scratching followed me, growing louder with every second. When I finally burst into the hallway, I slammed the panel shut and pushed the bookshelf back into place, leaning against it as I gasped for air. I didn't stay to see what would happen next. Grabbing my keys, I ran out into the storm, not stopping until I was in my car and speeding away from the house. The police didn't find anything when they searched the house the next day. No one in the crawlspace. No sign of forced entry. They told me it was probably just my imagination, maybe stress or an overactive mind. But they didn't see the photos. They didn't hear the breathing. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see that face. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're still there, hiding in the shadows, waiting for me to come back. There's something unsettling about moving into a house with a history you don't know. At first glance, it seemed perfect, a cheap, quiet spot at the edge of town. Affordable, private, just far enough away from the noise of city life. I had been looking for something like this for months, and this place fit the bill. The owners were eager to rent, and the price was right. For a one-story house, it wasn't particularly old, but it did show signs of wear, a leaky faucet in the kitchen, creaky floorboards, and a faint musty smell that lingered in the air. Small things that could be ignored, I thought. I moved in alone. I needed the peace. It wasn't just the house I was running from, but everything around it, the memories, the chaos, the noise. I didn't care that the house had been vacant for a while. It was the escape I needed. The first day passed without incident. I unpacked, set up my essentials, and spent the evening scrolling through my phone, trying to ignore the silence that settled in once the sun dipped below the horizon. The quiet was different here, deeper, more intense. But I ignored it. I was used to being alone. It wasn't until the second night, after a day of unpacking, that something happened. Something I still can't explain. Around 11 p.m., the quiet of the house was broken by a soft thud, barely audible over the hum of the heater. At first, I shrugged it off. A tree branch, maybe, or the house settling. But something about the sound felt different, heavier, as if whatever made it didn't belong here. Curiosity got the best of me. I slipped off the couch and walked toward the front door, switching on the porch light. I opened it, peered into the dark street, and found nothing. The wind rustled the leaves, and the world outside was still. But then, I saw it. A piece of paper, folded neatly, lay in the middle of the welcome mat. It wasn't weighed down by anything. No envelope, nothing to stop it from blowing away. Just paper. I bent down and picked it up. The paper was damp, the ink slightly smudged. But the message was clear. Do not leave the house after midnight. No signature. No explanation. Just those 7 words. I stared at the paper for a moment, a strange unease creeping through me. It could have been a prank, something left by the previous tenants. But why leave it now? Why not earlier in the day? I laughed it off and crumpled the paper, tossing it into the trash. Midnight was just another hour in the night, I thought. Nothing to worry about. The clock ticked past 11:58 p.m., and the house settled back into its oppressive silence. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, but my mind kept wandering back to the note. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, felt louder, sharper. At exactly 12 a.m., it came. 3 slow knocks at the front door. Soft, deliberate, almost hesitant, like someone trying not to disturb the neighbors. I froze. My heart skipped a beat, and I held my breath, waiting. Maybe it was a drunk neighbor at the wrong house, or a late-night delivery. But then the knocks came again, louder this time. 3 more taps, each one more insistent than the last. I got up, my legs shaky, and walked toward the door. My breath quickened. I pressed my eye to the peephole, but when I looked out, there was nothing. The porch was empty. I turned to step away when I heard it. A second knock, this time from the back door. My stomach twisted. I spun around, panic settling in. The layout of the house didn't make sense for someone to move that fast without being heard. I had locked the back door earlier, I was sure of it. And yet, the knocking continued, growing louder, more frantic. By 12:10 a.m., the knocking was coming from everywhere, the windows, the walls, the ceiling. The sound grew faster, more rhythmic, until it felt as if it were closing in on me, surrounding me. I grabbed my phone, trying to dial for help, but there was no signal. The screen flickered once, then went black. I sank to the floor, curling into a corner of the living room. My mind raced, heart pounding in my ears. The house felt like it was pressing in on me, the air thick with something I couldn't describe. The note didn't say what would happen after midnight, but something told me I was about to find out. Then, the door handle rattled. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The house was quiet again. I sat there, staring at the front door, my chest tight with fear. The rattle of the door handle was louder now, as though someone were trying to force their way in. The door creaked open slowly, just an inch, revealing the empty porch outside, bathed in the weak light of the street lamp. No one stood there. No figure in the doorway, no shadow lurking in the dark. But I felt it. Behind me. A presence, just out of sight, but so heavy that it pressed against my skin. I turned quickly, my eyes searching the living room, but I saw nothing. The room was empty, still. Yet the feeling remained. Something was there, something I couldn't see. I turned back to the door. The porch was empty, but the door didn't close. It remained slightly ajar, as if waiting for something, or someone. That's when I saw it. In the reflection of the door's glass, just behind me, I saw the figure. It was barely visible, a faint outline, but unmistakable. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty again. The door creaked open wider, and I realized, too late, that the house wasn't just haunted by the past. It was alive, feeding off my fear, pulling me deeper into its grip. I stumbled backward, heart racing as I tried to move toward the door. But it was too late. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. The house seemed to close in on me, its walls pressing together, the knocking now inside my head, louder and louder. I stood frozen, staring at the door, heart racing, as the silence seemed to stretch longer than it should have. The reflection in the glass was gone, but the heavy air lingered, suffocating me with every breath. I tried to move, but my legs were like stone, refusing to obey. Then, the house groaned, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from the very foundation itself. The walls shuddered, and the lights flickered above me. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling, but before I could touch it, the rattling started again, from behind me. I spun around, my pulse pounding in my ears, but the room was empty, except for the shadows. They were thicker now, darker, and they seemed to be crawling toward me, stretching like limbs, reaching for something. For me. The knocking, the constant, maddening knocking, started again. Not from the doors or the windows, but from within the walls. From everywhere. It grew louder and faster, each tap like the heartbeat of the house, beating in time with mine. And then, I heard a whisper, a voice so soft, so quiet, that it almost felt like a thought, not sound at all. You shouldn't have ignored the warning. The words chilled me to the core, and before I could react, the door to the outside swung open on its own. Not with the creak I expected, but violently, slamming wide, like a gaping mouth ready to swallow me whole. I didn't hesitate. I ran. My legs finally obeyed as I sprinted toward the open door, my mind consumed by one singular thought, escape. But as I crossed the threshold, something grabbed me. A cold hand, long fingers wrapping around my wrist. I screamed, struggling, but the grip tightened, pulling me back. I twisted, trying to break free, but the darkness of the house was too strong. It pulled me back inside, into its suffocating embrace. In the distance, I saw the porch light flicker out. The last thing I saw was the door, slowly closing, inch by inch, until it was shut tight, sealing me in. Some warnings are meant to be heard. Some signs are meant to be followed. When you ignore them, you might find that the things you run from are closer than you think. And the house you think you're escaping, may never let you go. That's for today from Whispering Shadows. Hope you enjoyed the stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling stories every day. And thanks for listening till to end.